Welcome to Founders Unplugged, hosted by Greg McCallum. Long-form, honest conversations with founders and entrepreneurs from around the world. This is part 2 of this episode. Be sure to check out part 1 if you haven't already. Link in the description.
And we're back for part 2 of my conversation with Clément. Clément?
Perfect.
Clément.
Perfect accent.
See, I was raised well to pronounce that correct. If you haven't watched part 1, I highly recommend you do. So go back and watch that. Otherwise, some of what we're talking about might not make sense. I don't know. Or don't. I don't really care. Do what you want. I'm not your boss. So welcome back. And thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it. So in part 1, we talked a lot about your journey and kind of where you've got to working in venture, specifically in kind of food and beverage and that sort of world. But I wanted to, there's a ton of questions I wanted to ask you about. So the first one was, I wanted to get your take, your opinion on some recent trends in your space. One in particular that's especially been making kind of headlines and stuff is this idea of influencers or content creators entering into this space. So you've got like your KSIs, your Logan Pauls, your Mr. Beasts, especially. And I know that before them, there were others that did that anyway. It's not like it's massively new, but they've done it in a bit more of a controversial way, you know, especially creating food products that are targeting kids, which again, others have done before too. But these guys are bigger, right? These are like high household names. So it's had a bigger impact. Do you guys have any, do you personally, and do you as a fund and people in the industry have like kind of a take and an opinion on this? Or do you see it as a good thing that it attracts more people to the space? Like what's your general consensus on that, if you have one?
Yes, no, it's a super good question. Multiple takes on that. The first one being some initiatives are great. I mean, again, sometimes it works well. It's right in, I would say, in tone between what the influencer or sometimes the star is. I think there are 2 levels. There are influencers. Also, you have stars that became influencers and then became entrepreneurs. It's again sometimes a logical way to build their brands as well, and some of those products launched by influencers resonate super well because you can feel it's genuine, i.e., it comes from somewhere in their heart, and they have this appetite for impact. Also, what matters is when they actually design and execute themselves, i.e., they feel accountable for what they are developing, which is not always the case. I mean, sometimes it's simply outsourced. It's dealt with by someone in their team. Sometimes the idea does not even come from them. It's simply, you know how it works with footballers. I mean, they have their footballer view and then the footballer incorporated. So because they need
have
to
like a committee basically. That's they're like, oh, do you know what we need in the brand? We need a food product. Tick the box kind of thing. Yeah,
exactly. And I think that's what makes the difference between those different initiatives. And I'm not only talking about stars with tens or hundreds of millions of followers, but also sometimes more, I would say, niche influencers where they feel that they can bring something to the market. And sometimes it comes from the good place. So I think this is fine. Again, it comes, as you say, with ensuring that it's done in a ethical way with the right procedures, right methodology. It's also made for the long term. You have a lot of stints, like short-term initiatives. I mean, I don't know if Prime falls into this, but clearly, I mean, there are ups and downs. They have a massive platform to put the product and their content in front of their followers. They also need to be sure that their follower base is the actual consumer, which is not always an obvious one. So as an investor, I'm not against it. Obviously, it's always a bit difficult to associate your brand, because we are a brand as well as an investor, to the brand of somebody else as a person, like whether it's an influencer or a star. There are also questions of ego. I mean, it's not always easy to deal with the ego of those type of personalities. Governance, and we can talk about it later, is super important in the way we deal with founders. And it goes both ways. We need to align on the government on a way to work together. How do we deal about important decisions, less important decisions, exit, bringing in important staff, potentially replacing the founders by like other management? It can happen as well. it makes all of those decisions a bit more difficult as soon as there is ego. So it's something that we need to be super careful about. But also, it's not only about influencers or stars creating brands. Sometimes they can join them later on, not as co-founder, but simply as a spearhead in terms of to have a face. Some of those brands, I mean, are really, really good at finding the exact good person to be the face of their brand. And sometimes they will invest actual time with the founders, and sometimes not only about marketing and content, but a bit more like, oh, can we design a product together? Is there more we can do to open our network when it comes to going abroad, like exporting the product? Oh, I know very well this person at Whole Food in the US. Maybe it's the perfect time to introduce you to them. So there are multiple ways to look at it. But overall, I mean, there's no blanket no to these situations, but it needs to be analyzed very precisely to ensure that as an investor, I'm comfortable with the deal that was struck, but also the commitment that is in the long term. Is it a short term stint? Is it a really long term commitment to make a dent and to have an impact? That's really what I want to check.
Have you guys ever come across any of those investment opportunities potentially for products that have been created by content creators, by influencers?
Yes.
Yeah.
More by, I would say, stars. Again,
Right.
I make the difference between the two because you have influencers are usually in a category specific with an audience which is related to their content and to their personal story. They can be an influencer in, I don't know, in fitness, in this, and you might become a star through this. I mean, in France, you have some influencers in fitness that became like public figures. And then you have, like, I would say, stars in the sense of simply they are known for their art, and then they come into this.
So
I
like
would say
musicians, actors, things
yes,
like that. Right.
lots of
Okay.
actors. I mean, I've received a lot of opportunities from the teams of actors
Oh,
launching
really?
a
Okay.
brand. It happens quite regularly. For influencers as well, we have seen a few. So people who started as influencers in beauty is a very common one, and they decide to launch their brand to capitalize on their content. Sometimes these are really well designed products, also well designed, let's say, market entry strategies. It's like, oh, it is obvious that we need to launch a product. Let's discuss. So we had really good discussions about this. I mean, we haven't done it per se, but I know that some investors are really, really attracted by this proposition. But also in terms of deal balance, it's a very different game. Like, it's not only ego, it's also money, and of course, they are very well advised people most of the time, especially stars. They are really, really big teams, very lengthy discussions. The question of reputation is super important for them, so it has to be well designed for them to make it work.
It's a question for them about building additional revenue streams at that point, right? It's not about building a company from the ground up. It's just looking at legacy. How can we create around this brand reliable sources of additional income that add layers of image and brand and reputation, like you say? It's a very different play, I imagine, than it would be for other situations, right?
Oh, it can also be creating companies, creating a legacy, and my name as a public figure can become a brand and can become a product.
Right.
I mean, again, I won't give names,
Especially in
but we have a
beauty and
few.
stuff, right? I imagine that
Yeah,
plays a big factor. Yeah.
beauty, beverages. I think you've seen. I mean, all of the uh, tequila, vodka, whiskey. I mean, everything.
Oh
I mean,
yeah, of
all those
course. Yeah,
alcohol.
yeah, yeah.
Like lots of possibilities, but it's something for which clearly there's an appetite to capitalize on followers.
I always liked I can't remember what the name of the tequila is, but the tequila created by Bryan Cranston and Aaron Paul from Breaking Bad. And I remember seeing some of their sort of, some of the footage that they did and going around, because they're just funny guys. And like, it's just interesting how we associate ourselves with those those actors. And I was like, you know what? And it just sold it to me, because I'm like, I like these people. I would love to one day try that product. And then the same with like the gin that Ryan Reynolds
Yeah.
created, and then some of the viral advertising behind that. And again, you're like, well, I like Ryan Reynolds, I like I like Hugh Jackman. He was putting Hugh Jackman in his videos. It's amazing how they can play psychologically on our like for a person or apparent like for a public figure to get us into various products, which I guess is what the influencer market is capitalizing on too, right? But to generally a much younger audience. There's a product that I've seen literally in the last week that's really started to circulate on my TikTok feed and stuff like that, called New Tonic. Are you familiar with that?
Not immediately, no.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. Oh, good. I maybe I brought something to you for a chat. Yeah. It's interesting because I've only just started seeing it to the point where the now vice president, literally of the United States, was Vance. I saw him on a TikTok talking about it last week, which was crazy. So they must be doing something right. But they're using the influencer marketing strategy basically. But it looks like like a nootropic kind of competitor to the energy drink space, basically, where I think they're adding, like, I don't know, lion's mane and like this kind of stuff, which is, I think that was inevitable that we were going to get there. But well, there you go. One to look up maybe later. But I wanted to get to this idea of the whole issue with kind of health and nutrition in this space, because obviously one of the bigger controversies to come out of the influencer space, the influencers entering this space, I should say, recently was with Lunchable. Was it called Lunchly or Lunchable? Lunchly. Yeah, Lunchly, who were compatible to Lunchables, right? With Mr. Beast and Chaos, one of these guys, and then also following on the back of Prime, which in of itself had some controversy. Like, I don't let my kid drink Prime. I just don't. Like,
Good choice.
I couldn't believe how quickly parents jumped on that and were bending their knee to buy their kids Prime. I just think that's crazy. You wouldn't give them a Red Bull. You wouldn't give them, unlimited access to Coca-Cola, full fat Coca-Cola. You know what I mean? It just really surprised me. But then it raises this question around nutrition and nutritional value, forgetting just kids, but for us as a whole. And I think we're getting fairly well educated as the general public now that there are a lot of very bad options on the market, especially when it comes to convenience food, being highly processed, using various types of oils or sugars and fats that are particularly bad for us, maybe even carcinogenic and all of this kind of stuff. How do you guys kind of approach that yourselves? Or again, like kind of going back to your views on that as a whole, like how much of a factor is that into either your decision making when you're looking at a product, okay, we're going to now have to bring this into mass production. Are you going to stay true to this? Is it not really that much of a concern, provided it can get out there? Like, what are your general thoughts on that? I'm just curious.
So, I mean, obviously being in the sector, and that applies to wellness, beauty, food, beverage. I mean, anything that, let's say, ingested or put on your skin. Obviously, we do our own research sometimes before talking to brands. So there are specific topics where we try to build our opinion. I mean, there is a lot of noise about UPF, so ultra processed foods. You have books, you have articles. It's extremely confusing as a consumer, because you read a lot, and there is always a halo effect on this, and you will. We're talking about influencers, but it's the same with social media. Obviously, if you read about how bad UPF are, you would read more and more and more about it, and the same type of sources. And it's I mean, they are immensely complex topics, and I won't get to this into detail. But when it comes to UPF, when it comes to sugar, when it comes to sweeteners, of course, products could be perfect on paper, i.e., you look at the back of pack, you read the ingredients, you say, oh, it looks simple enough, it's amazing. But again, it will not appeal to all customers, simply because, again, as investors, as, let's say, I would say highly engaged consumers, you look at these nutritional values, you look at the level of UPF very, very closely, and you can build a very strict posture about all of this and say, oh, I will only buy this and this and this. But we have to remind that we are in a microcosm, right? We are not, I mean, I am not the standard consumer. As much as I would love to be like the the normative consumer so that I have a view on everything. I am not, simply because probably I read more about this. I have tried more products. I have my own taste. What we need to do as investors is, where do we make a dent? Where is the impact we can make? Sadly, I mean, again, you can make an impact by being an amazing brand and be sold at Holland & Barrett and Planet Organic. You will match exactly what your consumers want. But if the incumbent, like large industrial players' product still represents 99.9% of the sales at Tesco, then the dent that you have made is fairly limited. To make an indent, you need to put something in front of consumers that will convince them to buy it. And by convincing mean taste, price. Sorry, it means taste, price. It's always the same. And of course, you might have all of those USPs trying to bring those amazing arguments, but it will take a lot of time. But also sometimes the barrier for your consumer is way too high. I mean, you cannot sell 10 pounds soup to someone at Tesco simply because, of course, they might want to change. They might love your value proposition, but you need to make sure that it works properly in terms of economics. And that's where it's super difficult for us as investors, because sometimes we look at marginal improvements for some categories. And it might still be processed, sometimes highly processed. It might still have sweeteners simply because, well, you need to make a choice between various topics. Also, you have incentives from the government, like the HFSS regulations gives you, let's say, an incentive to match exactly the type of nutritional values so that you can be on the shelves or can be promoted properly in the stores. So it's a lot of topics we need to look at. And what it comes to at the end is, if I want to be a £100 million brand just in the UK, I need to make compromises sometimes. And of course, we have an ideal, but the reality, the actual ideal, is to convert new customers to slightly better products. And that can come with nutritional values, that can come with less UPF, that can come with better ingredients. There are always scares, of course, on some ingredients, and there are ingredients that get banned every year. I mean, especially
that's what I was going to ask about, because I remember, when I was a kid growing up, the big conversation was always around numbers, right? I remember very distinctly, as a kid walking around with my mum in the supermarket, and she would be looking at, oh no, too many numbers, and it's only later that I discovered that numbers are constantly being banned,
yes.
Being introduced, and that's because it's just like, it's a science, it's chemistry, and it takes a long time for these scientific discoveries to take place. We can't just ban everything and then slowly introduce it. That's not the way the world works. You have to use what the best known science is right now to keep people safe. But that information changes as you get new information, new studies are done, and also people, unfortunately, sometimes have to suffer a side effect before someone even recognizes there's an issue. And so it may be that there is some harm done before people get to it, research it. That can take years, and then come to the conclusion, oh shit, actually this is really dangerous. We shouldn't be allowing this. And that's just the reality of the world we live in. It's not. I think some people who don't know as much about that space think that it's kind of insidious or intentional to try and harm people. And I don't think it's definitely not. It's just that it's the case that before you go ahead and ban a chemical compound, you have to think about the effects that can have. If you ban it without enough information, you can completely destroy industries and entire brands. You have to be careful about that and do a lot of research and back it up. There is a scientific method for a reason, right? But like you say, these things happen all the time.
And it's also a question of external externalities. It comes to reducing waste, for example.
Right.
There are actual reasons why sometimes using UPF can be interesting for convenience as well. So also as a consumer, you have to look at those additional USPs that come from those formulations, ingredients. And it's something that is super hard to comprehend as a consumer, because you might want the top-notch product, but you realize that, oh, if it's a top-notch product, but
Hi, a friendly reminder to share this episode with your network, like, and subscribe. And if you are feeling really supportive, please consider reviewing the show on the podcast platform of your choice. It all really helps support what we do. Thank you. Now back to the show.
the shelf life of the product is 3 times less than another, it might cause problems as well. And simply, there will be more waste, there will be less convenience. So it's a very, very complex topic. However, it's still amazing that there is a lot of noise about it. Because, I mean, noise brings debate, debate brings change, and that's amazing. I mean, the reality is also, it might make some people cook more. I mean, I cook a lot. I mean, I'm lucky that I work from home, so it's possible. I know that if I were not working from home every day, I might have to rely on those UPFs more. Even if I know about it, even if I have enough money to pay for it, you still have a moment in your life where you make wrong choices. And the point is education. The point is offering alternatives. But there are some categories, and I highly recommend entrepreneurs to look at actual data in their categories. I mean, you can buy data packs, like the grocer, for example. The newspaper has amazing packs of data on every single industry, or even product category, and sometimes sub-product categories, when you can see, okay, who are the incumbents? Who is it big with private label? Who are the main players? Are there new players? What's the growth? And it also gives you a feel of what consumers have in front of them, because it's, of course, super interesting to go in the stores. I mean, I spend way too much time in stores. I love going shopping on holidays. I think it's something I would do, just going in the aisles and see, okay, what's new here? What's the physiognomy of this product category in Carrefour, in Railway, in Germany? It's important, but the actual data behind is even more important. Is, okay, in numbers, what does it represent? Because you can see front of shelf, but what matters is, what do consumers actually buy in those shops? And I highly recommend to look into it as an entrepreneur, and to make sure that you understand the dynamics before you enter a category. Some categories are still, not kidding, less than 1% private label and 98% incumbents. Like, sometimes one conglomerate has 70% of the market. It still exists despite all of the discussions that we have, all of the innovation that comes on the market, the thousands of entrepreneurs in consumer product goods. You still have majority of the space taken by incumbents, and there are spots to be taken. It's important to realize that lots of those categories have a massive potential, but you need to understand those figures before taking.
But isn't that because a lot of the time these incumbents can they create loss leaders in those categories quite often, because they can afford to create loss leaders in those categories. So, for example, you look at things like bread, milk, cheese, things like ham products. The what we would consider to be basics. Those don't make money for those companies. Often they're selling them at the price where they can actually turn a profit. But because they are such huge companies, they can afford to do that, and they understand that actually in creating those products and putting them on the shelves, especially those created by, say, the supermarkets, who obviously now create a lot of their own foods, their own brands, that it's an important thing to be able to do, to have those low cost products to even bring people in the first place. Does that make it then very, very difficult? I mean, presumably it must make it very, very difficult for anyone. If I wanted to create a new ham product, like, you know what I mean? I'm kind of screwed. Like, if I'm not going to enter into that market. I can't create a range of low cost, affordable ham that's in any way competitive with like a Sainsbury's or Tesco's own brand, basics ham. Like, there's just no way, right?
You know what? I mean, I sometimes have the same, let's say, mindset when it comes to what I call staple goods. So
Staples,
whether
yeah.
it's pasta, or whether it's ham, or whether it's milk. But despite that, you still have innovation. I mean, I just take an example. I mean, the brand launched recently to make butter better. Better butter. It's those type of categories where you would have asked me 5 years ago, I would have told you no chance. And you know what? Somebody is trying, and hopefully they get it to work, because I mean, I love butter, so I really hope they can make something work out. But you have other categories. I mean, milk. I mean, even regular, even eggs. I mean, you have protein enhanced eggs now. Who would have thought about this? Maybe it's not the solution to everything, but even in those categories, you have innovation. I think you shouldn't stop to there. I think it's a question of even if it's a category where private label is super big. I mean, sandwiches, a lot of private label. You'd have a few incumbents, but it's and then most of the time it's people making their own sandwiches. But even in those categories, there is a possibility to build something like beans. I mean, the company Bold Beans, for example, small brand, but still, it's a category where you would have told me 5 years ago, no chance. And you know what? It can work. If you look at the brand, if you look at the specs, if you look at the way to make people eat those products, I mean, beans is not super sexy as a category, and still you can make a sexy brand out of it. Same with butter. So I think it's a question of how do you position yourself as a brand, and you always find some ways to make a dent. And of course, it's easier to make a dent in pet food than in butter, probably. But you simply have to have the conviction to say, I can do it, and I can bring something new in this category.
Yeah, but butter is actually one that really annoys me as a consumer. Because, I know the value of really good quality butter, having worked as a chef, and it is basically impossible to find really good quality butter.
Hopefully you will be soon.
What? Oh, okay, good. Well, you'll have to let me know. Yeah.
I'll send you.
It is. I mean, and even just the shitty butter that you buy is just so expensive, and I just don't understand it. I mean, it's mostly just emulsifiers and various forms of blended oils. It's like, where's the animal, like the real animal fats here, guys? Like, I want real butter. But anyway, I digress. Do you have to stay quite well read on the topics of these various additives and things like that? Do you have to stay quite on that, or is that not that kind of outside of the scope of what you do?
So I would say yes when it comes to understanding the trends, i.e., if I read about a trend, whether it's on newspapers, on the grocer, in the street, when I see something new, I mean, it's my natural curiosity to try to understand what's the driver behind it and what should my position as an investor be. I mean, UPF is a big one. I mean, UPF has been on the news. I even wrote a paper internally to try to get our conviction built on this internally. Do we want our investments to be 100% non-UPF? It's a very, very simple, basic question, but I mean, the answer is probably no. I mean, it would be very, very difficult. But I wouldn't say we go into extreme details on the exact additives. There are additives that we know. Sometimes, like you work in chocolate, yeah, of course you cannot use titanium dioxide. In some countries it's banned, in other it's not. There's some things that are important to know. But also when it comes to like nutritional values, it's important to understand. I mean, very basic facts like everybody talks about protein, for example. You need to know why it's important. WHO is like the World Health Organization is changing their minds regularly on this. They change the way it should be approached, giving insights to incumbents. Also, the incumbents, they like the big players like the Nestle, the Mars, all of those. They publish their own reports on those. They're trying to explain it to their boards what matters in terms of nutrition as well. And of course, it's harder to, let's say, to think that it's the right source when it comes from incumbents, but still they deploy a lot of money about those topics. So it's interesting to read. At least research is extremely complicated, extremely expensive. But I think it's important for us as investors, especially when you're more specialized in the consumer space, to understand there are some topics we simply learn on the go. I mean, you would have asked me 7 years ago, what do I know about pet food? I don't have a dog. I have no clue. Still, 7 years later, I think I can talk about it. And sometimes it's part of the due diligence, and sometimes it's simply involving the right people for us to build a conviction. We don't want to influence entrepreneurs, of course, but if an entrepreneur comes to us, we have a due diligence, and it would take a few weeks. We might onboard a specialist on a very a point of detail on nutrition, on safety, on any topic. And hopefully what comes out of this diligence can be helpful for the entrepreneur as well. Like, oh, by the way, we noted that in our due diligence, this aspect of your formulation or ingredient, you may think of replacing it for X, Y, Z reason. It can be for a safety reason. It can be simply from a logistical point of view, telling yourself, oh, if you keep using this ingredient, it can be difficult to make a good margin in 10 years because the main producers will not use it. There are these kind of things we can have a look at. But again, as an investor, I cannot be knowledgeable about every single topic, but I think it's important to understand what the trends are.
Yeah, well, I'm a dog owner. So what should I know about dog food that you think that you know that most general people don't know? Have you got any secret insights?
Well, I mean, I've been working on pet food for a long time, but it's a very, very broad sector. I think it depends a lot on. I mean, first, very basically, are you a pet owner or are you a pet parent? That's the first question.
Well, I'm a pet parent.
You're a pet parent, so it changes things quite a lot. Yeah. And I mean, the benchmark we can give is, would you give this to your son or your daughter as well?
Right.
What type of do you think that giving kibbles to your dog is good or bad? I mean, there's no one size fits all answer, and also because it looks at how consumers respond and also what can they afford. I mean, we always say for human food, the prices can be crazy high. Like it's a 1-to-3 ratio. I mean, in pet food, it's a 1-to-10 ratio sometimes. You can find kibbles for £1 a kilo. You can find ultra fresh food made by a chef for £15 a kilo. So the spectrum is super broad. I think it's more, okay, what do I feel is important for my pet, depending on their age, on their breed, on their energy levels, on how do you behave you as a pet parent? Do I have the time to take my dog 5 times a day for a walk or not? It will influence massively the way you feed it. And you have lots of opportunities to try as well. I mean, I think it's easier with dogs than with cats. I mean, dogs are less fussy, so just go and try various things. There's a lot of noise about ultra fresh food, like slowly cooked, all of these things. I think there's no consensus on what is better or worse. But I think in the end, what matters is you as a pet parent, how do you feel about your dog, and also what can you afford? At some point, it's a question of making the right choices for yourself. So yeah, that comes to it. It's I could talk about it for hours, but it's there's a lot of innovation as well in that space. It's a very, very active. Investments have been in the billions over the past 15 years. So it's included in the food and beverage now. As long as you consider that your pet is on the same level as your kids, potentially it becomes a very important topic.
Yeah, part of your family, right? Yeah, I mean, look, I feed my son dog food, so I treat them the same. We're all about equality in my household. But seriously, I would love to feed my dog raw food, like just the convenience of having the kibble, the tin food. It's just because he's a German Shepherd, right? And actually, they don't eat as much as I thought they would. Mm-hmm. Once they become adults, they eat one main meal a day with bits of treats here and there. I didn't expect that before we got him. I was expecting to eat 3 times a day because of the size of him, the energy. Maybe if we walked him more than, because we walk him twice a day, but maybe if we walked him 3 times a day or 4 times a day, that would be different. But my instinct always said, we should feed him raw food, right? Because of he's quite a big dog. He's got big old teeth, and he's probably going to want to have raw chicken and beef and whatever else. And I every now and then I'll do that. I'll buy him like a whole chicken or some big bits of beef, and I'll just or some liver and stuff like that. But and obviously he loves it, but it's just from a practical level, day to day. And this is the other thing about food as a whole, not just for dogs but for humans too. Going back to your point about affordability and convenience, this is really what it comes down to. And I've thought a lot about this over the years. Being someone we're very, very fortunate enough to be shown by my mother how to cook from a very young age, always being given freshly cooked hot meals pretty much every day of my life. Now I cook at home for my family every single day. A bit like you, I work from home, so I can do that. but I've always been very, very aware of the fact that I'm very lucky, to have had that upbringing and to be in the position that I am to do that. For most people, the average individual who works ridiculous hours a day, sometimes a couple of jobs, we've got to be practical about this. There are people who work, 2 jobs, and they're maybe single parents and they've got kids, and the choices they make are a convenience play. They have to just be about getting the food in their stomach and then go to bed so they can go and work again the next day. Sometimes that's what it is. It's as simple as that.
It's what I say when it comes to, as an entrepreneur, to come out of your bubble is
Right.
don't only look at nutrition, taste, quality. It's a super, super, super important topics. But most of us live in a bubble. Again, especially in the investor world, we tend to, it's high income, I would say highly network driven. You talk to similar people, but in a sense, as a founder, just expand the bubble and look at those topics, like the topic of convenience, the topic of education, the topic of obviously of pricing, is where do you really want to make a dent? Like, do you want to be able to show to your friends and family that you've made the best product ever and they love it, or they tell you they love it, or they, or do you want to be like really a player whose name is recognized and have an actual impact on all classes and all type of consumers? That's really the aim it should be. Of course, it does not mean that it's bad to be what I call a bubble product. It's not bad because you still have an impact. And maybe you will
just need to be realistic about what that means, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. Especially if you're looking at wanting to sit on that Whole Foods aisle, or organic, like all of that kind of stuff. You have to be realistic. That's going to attract a very specific type of yes. clientele, basically. Yeah, I totally get it. Yeah, it makes sense. I wanted to ask as well about. I said I would in part 1 about the shelves, right? So you've got a shelf, and if you're just listening to this show, I'd strongly advise going over to YouTube or Spotify and watching the video, because you've got a lovely shelf behind you. By the way, I think you have a ghost, because something did fall over a minute ago. So just so you know.
I think too.
But I didn't say anything because I didn't want to scare you. But you might have a ghost. Just FYI. But yeah, that's just one shelf, right? You've got many all around you, haven't you? Of your products.
I do, and again, it's a choice that I have, that I want to be close to my products and to not only those that I invested in personally or through DLF, behind me, but also, I won't show you the other side of the room, but I have probably twice the size with lots of samples that I received, and I know it's. The question of samples is super important. Of course, we receive a lot of them. We try a lot of things. We try to give a feedback as honest and true as possible. Not everything is good or to my taste, but it's super important for us to also perceive the commitment that you have to customer service. If I don't know if you've already seen those influencer packs. Those influencers, they receive packs from brands, and they are super well packaged. It gives them like the feeling of being valued and to receive it. Of course, I don't care as much as an influencer, but it's still important to see, if I were a customer ordering from you D2C, if I were to receive what you sent me, I would be amazed. And sometimes the quality is amazing. I receive those boxes. It's super qualitative. Sometimes I receive like pre-launch products, like very, very, I would say, basic packaging, because they simply want to show me what they are doing. And that's also amazing.
Like proof of concept type stuff, right?
Exactly, like the POC level, and it's super good. I think as investors, of course, and especially in that space, it's important that we can build a connection with the product. We don't have to like every product that we invest in, of course, because we are not the let's say the universal customer. But it's super interesting, and I feel like I have all of my calls in front of those shelves, and it makes me think. It makes me able to compare, look at designs, what sticks out of the crowd as well. It's one thing I recommend a lot to entrepreneurs, this shelf approach, which is always take a picture of a shelf aisle in Sainsbury or Tesco, wherever. Take a picture and just on Photoshop, just stick your product somewhere there, and just say, okay, how
That's
does
a cool
it?
idea.
As a
Yeah.
consumer, I mean, how would I feel if I saw this product on the shelves in these very sometimes very boring aisles? And okay, how would it stick out? Not only in terms of design, but also in terms of price, of positioning. Like try to put yourself into the situation of putting yourself in the shoes of a consumer walking down the aisle at the supermarket. It's super important, and that's why I want to keep that feeling at home. I'm not sure everybody at home likes that, but at least it's my environment, and it's an important part. And also, some choices I've made were bad, not because sometimes I've invested, but sometimes because I have not invested. And it kind of reminds you, oh, this one I didn't do it, and
The one that
that
got
was a
away.
mistake. That was a mistake because this product is
Right.
amazing, and the customer responds pretty well. Kind of forces you to look back at the mistakes you might have made. I mean, we are. I mean, I know that people tend to describe VCs as helping the founders, value add, what value can you bring, what can you do for the founders, introductions, uh, assistance on finance, on marketing. Yes, but the main job of the investor is capital allocation. My job is to allocate capital, and that's something we tend to forget sometimes. Is my job is to first return money to my investors, to make the good choices. Sometimes it's about risk management. There are some choices I would love to make, companies I would love to invest in, but sadly, it does not fit into my mandate. It does not fit into my timeline. It does not fit into the type of return I want to get. And it's super hard to say no to entrepreneurs. I know that sometimes it's very sad to have to say no, and I can try. I mean, I try to put myself in the shoes of entrepreneur receiving those emails. We try to answer as comprehensively as we can. Usually, we give a few points. I know sometimes the answers are not the answers that the entrepreneur wants to receive. Maybe they don't agree with the arguments that we give. But most of the time, it's a question of alignment with what we do, the timeline, the governance. There are tons of reasons why, and we make mistakes. I mean, I've made lots of mistakes in investment. It's why we are VC and not PE. We have to take risks, but sometimes we need to make sure that the construction of our portfolio, given the timeline that we have and the resources that we have and the time that we can spend, is properly allocated because we are a company as well. I mean, we run a company as well. We are not entrepreneurs, but we still run a company, and that's something that matters as well. And realizing that we make mistakes is also super important. So, answering to your question, that's why my flat is a warehouse.
Are there any products on the shelves that that you're particularly, I don't know, that you love, that you would want to shout out or anything like that?
I mean, I love them all because
Very diplomatic answer.
I mean, it's a very pragmatic answer, but I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
most of those are in Europe or in the UK. I think some of your viewers might know some of them. Some of them are
I
extremely
recognize a
vocal
couple. Yeah.
on LinkedIn, so I might not put even more marketing effort in them. Some of them are like really, really early stage. Some of them are more staple names right now. Some of them with
I recognize the Surreal cereal.
yes, so we are there.
Yeah, they worked a lot with influencers actually and stuff, didn't they, on YouTube and things like that. I've seen a
Indeed,
lot of campaigns. Yeah.
no, indeed. But it's interesting that the shelf. I mean, you can look at the shelf. I'm happy to send the names, but uh, those products uh, they can be a match to many different types of consumers. Like I'm not saying that like the perfect consumer will love all of those. I think everybody has their own construct when it comes to convenience, when it comes to taste, when it comes to price.
If you are enjoying this episode and want to support the show, please like, subscribe with notifications turned on, and let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. This lets YouTube know we are doing something right. Back to the show.
Awesome.
And also when it comes to impact. I mean, there's always, and there's a cost to impact. I mean, impact is rarely for free. Otherwise, incumbents would do it. You know, they need to maintain their margins. They have to answer to their capital markets. It's a very, very different game. Here, most of the time with those brands, they need to answer to first their customer because their customer are their first backer. I mean, as an investor, I'm not the first backer. The first backer has to be the customer. And all of those brands got product market fit, and there are thousands of people eating them or using them. I mean, I have tampons, for example, like bamboo tampons. It's not only about food and beverage, but also, I mean, one thing that is personal to me is I know that we talked a lot about B2C and brands, but there's also what's behind the curtain. I mean, I invest as well in topics that are a bit more tech related, of course, that I cannot put on the shelf, but topics that pertain to waste management. So reducing the waste in shops, for example, trying to develop lab grown meat, trying to build different ways of formulating basic products, which of course are more like a personal thing as an angel. But what I feel as an investor is super important, because to always remember that there is the face of products, like what you see, what you eat, what you drink, what you put on your face. But there's also all of the complexities behind that need to be addressed. And unfortunately, those topics are not as sexy. I think my first investment 8 years ago was in a company that develops markers to reduce the risk of Legionella, like a disease in food during the production process. So it's just putting reactive components to ensure that the food is safe. It's not a very sexy topic, but it's super important, because that's what makes sure that those products can be put on the shelves and are safe for kids, for pets, for everyone.
That's really moving more towards food tech.
Exactly,
Food science.
That's part. And there are amazing investors in that space as well. But I think as an investor in B2C, it's always important to be grateful to everything that happens in the back of the store, because we tend to forget about it, and it's not as easy to explain it to investors and to consumers that there are reasons why those products can be expensive. Is also because they come with constraints, and there's a lot of investment trying to resolve their constraints as well.
Yeah, from both the scientific and legal, a whole range of things, right? Yeah, I did. There's been a couple of episodes that I've done with a couple of people that really stand out. If you ever have the time, I highly recommend. I think it was way back in season 1. I spoke with a lady called Beata, who was a scientist turned chocolate maker. Like, really amazing story. I won't tell you all of it, but basically she was working on cancer treatment. She developed a really innovative new cancer treatment out in the States. She then found out that she had developed cancer herself, the very specific cancer that she created a treatment for, used her treatment to treat her own cancer, then went down this whole rabbit hole while she was getting treatment for cancer, down sugars and the issue with sugar and how that relates to cancer and all of that, and ended up creating this new chocolate company that is sugar-free chocolate, blah blah blah, like and completely self-taught. Created her own lab and took a very scientific approach to creating. She was like the mad scientist in the chocolate world. Really amazing stuff. And then really recently, to your point about waste management and stuff, I had a guy on called, I'm going to forget his name now. What was his name? Naman, who's an Indian guy who lives in Hong Kong, who's created this really amazing beer company that uses waste bread from the local area to create these beer products. And the whole business model is to always look at local waste bread and waste bread products to create beers specific to that bread type, and so they're going to be spreading out and doing different areas, looking at those types of bread and creating beer products around it. Like, just amazing innovation. Like, this guy as well, he's like in his 20s, you know what I mean? And it's like, it just blows my mind how incredible some of these innovations are. Really is. I highly recommend, if you're interested, please do check those out, and people listening too who are interested on these topics, because these are really impressive people creating just really impressive things and solving really, really important problems. I think, really interesting approaches. But you mentioned something there really quickly I wanted to pick up on before I let you go as well, which was about lab-grown meat. Like, I'm really torn on this, and it's not like I have a lot of time to look on this anymore, but I've seen a lot of mixed information around lab-grown meats being not potentially quite as good for us as we would hope they would be, with some ingredients there that are questionable. A lot of new science, so like we were talking about earlier, when you get new science, new territory, there's a lot of unknowns, right? In the same way that we look at like vaping, for example, you probably noticed I vape throughout this conversation. There's still a lot of unknowns around that and the long-term effects. Like, what is your understanding of that space? Are you quite bullish on that as a whole, or do you see there being some potential long-term problems there in that space?
So I am, for sure. I think there's a question, as you say, when it comes to novel foods, so foods that are sometimes not yet regulated or understood to the fullest extent. I mean, for lab-grown meat, there was the first regulatory approval given in the UK a couple of months ago. So things are moving. The EU is not there yet. It's starting in the US. Singapore was at the forefront of it. I think there is, of course, a barrier to not only for consumers but also for regulatory bodies to get 100% confidence that it will create a one-to-one equivalent. The good thing is, which is also the bad thing, is it's going to take time to make this one-to-one price parity happen. I think we're probably 2, 3, 4 years away from that, which already seems like
it's still
close
improved
enough.
massively in the last couple of years, though. Like
It
when
has
I
been.
first saw it in the supermarket, a few years back compared to now, it's incredible how much cheaper it's got.
I mean,
But yeah, you're right. It's still not quite comparable.
I mean, it's still not in supermarkets. I mean, some cooks have been using it in the US in some restaurants, like very niche restaurants. But I mean, even if the results have been amazing and billions of dollars have been poured in Israel and Singapore in the US, trying to find the right way to get sales to grow, it is going to take time. But I think it's just a question of I mean, science needs to move on. I think there are resources allocated to it. If it's like, I mean, I always compare these kind of things to a nuclear fusion. It's going to take a lot of money, but the day it works, if it ever works, would be a massive leap for humankind. It's like, oh, if we make it work, eventually, it's going to be amazing. It's kind of those topics where I think at some point we simply need to give it a chance and try to make it work. I think we're closer than we think to getting there, hopefully. But it's typically those type of topics. When I mention as an investor to be interested in food tech, like proper tech, I think it's part of the deal when you look at those topics is what's next? What is it going to look like in 10 years? My primal fear, when I feel down, is, oh, am I still going to have a job in 10 years? Like, will there be innovation in 10 years in a sufficient volume for me to keep investing? And every year I see crazy new things, so I'm not too worried about it, but I need to be sure.
I wouldn't be worried, yeah.
Exactly. Hopefully I wouldn't worry too much, but it's just a question of understanding what's up. And there are tens of thousands of people working on those topics in the shadow. We always see the end product, but I think there are lots of things that come down to it. And again, I mentioned food safety, waste management is a massive topic, ingredients as well, reduction of waste. There are lots of ingredients as well that simply we need to grow, because these are amazing ingredients, but they are not available just yet. And we need to understand, oh, currently this product, like this ingredient, this plant grows in this country and 99% of the production is in this country. Can we make it grow in Europe? And can we make it in a sufficiently unit economic to reach the right unit economics to make it work? And it's not only about tech; it's also about trying new things and trying to make ingredients move from one place to the other. Because there's a question of capacity as well. There are lots of amazing ingredients that we don't discover. We simply rediscover them, and hopefully, if they were produced at a better price, they would be amazing to use.
It's interesting as well because there are climate impacts on this too. Because I heard recently about the climate in the UK, in certain parts of the UK now has changed to an extent where we have similar climates to now than used to be in some parts of southern France. So wine production, for example, in the UK is considered a really great place to be. Yeah. It's at pretty much its peak because now we've got these ideal conditions for very specific types of grapes to grow that can no longer be grown in regions of France where they've been grown for hundreds of years because of climate change. And that will presumably have an impact on other types of produce and crops and stuff as well. Well, I think that's hugely interesting.
It's very true. I mean, we're investors in an English sparkling wine brand, Helinckx Valley. based
Oh,
on.
I think that's the one that I was hearing about recently. Yeah, yeah.
But there are a few, and clearly the question of climate made a change. It's investment we made more than 6 years ago. At the time, you say people would laugh and say, "Oh yes, Hampshire is going to be the new Bourgogne," and well, sadly, is coming to be truer and truer. And I know that big houses in France, like champagne houses, are pouring a lot of money into that space in Britain, trying to understand what their future can be. Because, as you mentioned it's a question of timeline, and we need to think ahead. Well, okay, what does the food and bev industry look like if things change dramatically? I mean, I don't know if you followed what happened with cacao. Cacao is just disaster. I mean, the prices have increased threefolds in 2 years.
Oh,
It's
really?
dramatic. I mean, look at the prices of cacao. Like
What's
per
driving
kilo.
that? Is that environment as well?
Yes, and it's pure environment. It's disease.
Right.
It's drought. It's produced in 3 countries more or less in the world. So it's really hard, and that's why so many entrepreneurs are trying to make chocolate without cacao these days, because it helps
Right.
solving this issue. But it's a,
And presumably a lot of that production takes place in third world countries as well, which have their
exactly
own sort of macroeconomic issues too, like war and conflicts and famine and everything else.
exactly, and you have to think about this for every single type of ingredient. I mean, some products are made of one key ingredient, and anything else is just ancillary to it. But as an investor, it's something we look at as well. Is, what can be the black swan effect in terms of supply chain that makes this a product not work?
Right. Or vulnerable. Yeah.
Vulnerable. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've also I went down the rabbit hole a few years back as well of soy. You know, soy is an incredibly, I think, destructive crop. I don't know if you have a different view on this, but from what I understand, it's really not the holy grail sort of crop or ingredient that people were hoping it would be. I think there's quite a lot of ignorance around that. You know, the level of destruction that it causes to produce such huge amounts of soy now is ridiculous, because there's a lot of obviously deforestation that occurs, but then the industry behind it, so the amount of pesticides and chemicals and things like that need to be used to grow that crop at the levels that we now need it, because it's in so many products, kill millions of different life forms after the deforestation, just to maintain it. And we're not just talking about insects, but different types of mammals and birds and rodents. And it's for some reason put on this pedestal to be this more ethical choice. And yet it's responsible for probably arguably far more damage to the environment and the ecosystems in which they're in than their products they replaced. And it's interesting, because on a smaller scale it made sense, but now it's taken over as being one of the main crops. It doesn't make as much sense anymore, and I don't think people really thought about that or think about that.
No, it does. And it's also the impact on population. I mean, we always forget, like, ESG goals are, yes, environment, but it's also social, and some aspects have dire consequences. Of course, some startups. I mean, I always think of Tony's, like the Tony's Chocolate Only, so the chocolate brand has been doing heavy work on those topics, trying to fight against bad supply chains and helping people on the ground. But of course, there are still small initiatives, but I think it's always something that resonates pretty well with investors. We talk a lot about environment. Of course, environment is a big thing in the ESG, but like the social aspect as well works well. And you could be a brand with only a social aspect and no environment aspect. It's maybe not the best way to put it, but it could work as well. There are lots of initiatives trying to help people locally, trying to insert people back into the life, into the work life, trying to help people with disabilities, with simply with a career that has to stop for X, Y, Z reason, and try to bring them back to, say, normalcy of life. So, I mean, there are many ways as well to have an impact. And I think we talked a lot about environment today, but there are other topics that can be tackled without having to completely change the supply chain that you have in terms of sourcing and environmental impact.
Absolutely. And look, I mean, I'll be honest, there are a ton of more things that I would love to talk to you about, because you're clearly very knowledgeable about this space, and I could talk to you for hours, but I do have to let you go at some point. So if you've got a couple of extra minutes, though, there was just one final thing I wanted to throw at you. Is that okay?
Sure.
So what I like to try and do sort of towards the end of, if we have time towards the end of every episode, is to ask kind of what is it that we hadn't talked about today, that or that you're seeing being talked about, that you would consider to be quite important, or something that you just want to kind of shed some light to. So do you have anything in mind that springs to mind when I ask you that?
I mean, something that comes up that ties directly to what you said, and I think it can be useful for your viewers when it comes to pitching to investors, which is, I guess, the point of having me, is know your customer, really. Like when you talk to an investor for the first time, simply check the level of information you need to deliver them about your topic. I know it can be super tempting to explain me for 15 minutes what UPF is. Obviously, you just lost 50 minutes out of a 1 hour slot. You could have spent those 50 minutes in a different way. I think it's just a question is asking from the get-go. First minute is, okay, what do you know about my space? Are you comfortable with the USPs and the concepts and the objectives that we have? Did you talk to other brands in that space? I mean, if I don't know anything about your space, I will say you, yeah, please tell me everything I need to know about what you're trying to achieve. If you feel that, I mean, if you want to talk to me about pet food or chocolate, I mean, obviously, I think you can use those 15 minutes better. So it's just a question of adapting your agenda to who you have in front of you. Because again, most of the time you have 45 minutes, 1 hour top to discuss and to make an impression with a new investor. So I think use that time in the best way possible and try to focus on the topics of interest for the investor.
I think that's really good advice in general for pitching as a whole, right? That's such good advice, because if it's actually fundamental to, the 15, 20 odd years I spent as an individual contributor in sales and then running and coaching and managing sales teams, which is that every pitch should start with discovery. Because of your discovery some form of discovery should inform the way that you approach the pitch, and the pitch should be catered to every individual, their situation, their needs, their understanding. So just asking a few questions like that, you're absolutely right. Just like, what do you know about this space? Like before I get going, just so I can make sure that I'm giving you the right information. I'm not telling you stuff that you already know. What do you understand about this? What do you understand about that? What's your interests? What do you look for? And then you slightly change the way that you approach it for that use case. And I think that's a really, really good advice. It works for sales. It works for pitching to investors across all industries, right? Not just yours, it's as well. So Indeed. Really, really good advice.
Show your passion, but be selective.
Yeah. And don't get too down a rabbit hole as well, because I see a lot of investors do that. People who pitch do that. Founders, because they're passionate about it, they get really into it, but they don't realize that the passion isn't shared in the same way on the other side of the call necessarily. So yeah, keep to the point. Yeah. Great advice. Thank you. Well, listen, man, I will let you go because I've taken up so much of your time already, but I really, really appreciate you speaking with me today. And I know that the audience will too. Really interesting what you do, and hugely valuable. So please keep doing it from both a VC and an angel perspective, right? You have a huge impact on both sides. And I've learned a lot from speaking to you. So I hope that others have too. And also, just for the record, I do have a prediction. I touched on this earlier, but I do have a prediction in trends. I think keep an eye on nootropics. They're going to be the new CBD, but in food. But I think they're going to last a little bit longer than CBD did.
I tend to agree.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So, look, I'm preaching to the choir here, man. Like, you already know. Cool. Well, look, I'll let you go, but thank you so much. I'll obviously put your social, information down there, the website, something like that. Is there anyone else you wanted to shout out or direct people to?
Not, but it was really insightful, and I really love to be on your show. And awesome. And yeah, please reach out to me. I mean, I read my LinkedIn messages. I'm pretty on it, so please feel free to. Cool. No issue with this.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Have a wonderful rest of the week, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon.
Great. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you for listening and or watching. Please like and subscribe, or if you are listening via podcasting service, and want to show your support, consider rating or leaving a review. It really helps. See you next week.